Afternoon. I nearly said good morning, but I suppose it must be morning somewhere on this great planet Earth of ours. You are most welcome to the Sunset Safari here, well, some of it from the safari tent. Out there, the other two vehicles of Jamie Patterson and Brent Leo Smith, they're knocking about here trying to find animals. I'm going to be in the tent for the extent of the afternoon. We're going to be looking at some of the more detailed little aspects of things that perhaps isn't quite so easy when you're on the vehicles. My name is James Hendry. On camera today, the not insubstantial form of Gert of Hoedspruit. Terrifying man, but he's behind the camera, so he's less terrifying when he's over there. Good morning, Gert.
Morning.
Yes, nice to see you. Afternoon, sorry, there I did it again. You are live here, which means that we'd very much like to talk to you. Please do contact us on Twitter, #SafariLive. Any questions you have about the safari you're seeing, about the animals that you will hopefully be seeing, perhaps about the trees, which you'll definitely be seeing, or any of the artifacts that we're going to have a look at here. And most especially, we can talk about Africa. There are so many misconceptions out there about this great continent of ours, and so we'd very much like to clear those up. So if you're sitting perhaps in North America on a Sunday afternoon, or perhaps you're in a early Monday morning in Australia, tell us your questions, tell us your concerns of this great continent, and we'll have a little discussion about those as we go. It's 19 degrees Celsius, which means at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, it feels a lot colder when the wind's blowing. And I wanted to show you two things here. This owl, unfortunately, is no longer. As you can see, it is not moving at a great speed. In fact, it is not moving at all. It is very dead. It is a pearl-spotted owl. Now, there are two kinds of vertebrates, in other words, animals that have a backbone or an internal skeleton that have developed the ability to maintain internal heat. They are called homeothermic. There we go. I nearly forgot that word for a second here. And this is one of them. Birds, of course. Now, we know that we think that birds, in fact, didn't develop feathers for flight, but that the flight came as a result of feathers, and that feathers, rather like the hairs on a mammal, came as a result of trying to stay warm. And because they're able to stay warm in habitats that perhaps like reptiles aren't able to and amphibians aren't able to, they were able to colonize parts of the world in the same way that human beings are able to colonize even further parts of the world, because we have the ability to not only regulate our own body temperature, but also build things and live in them and put clothes on that help us to regulate our own body temperature. So that's the two species, or the two classes of vertebra, mammals and birds, that are able to regulate their body temperature, and that's because of feathers and hair. And that's a wonderful example of what we call convergent evolution, where feathers and hair have evolved from completely different roots to achieve the same strategy. Now, something that is unable to do that sort of thing is something like this weevil. Now, this weevil is very dead and very cold. It's cold because of the temperature outside, and it's also cold because Geraldine put him in a freezer last night in order to keep him fresh. And he's a lot fresher than this owl right now. The owl is starting to smell fairly rank at this stage. And because of the cold, you will find that many of these animals, the insects, are totally immobile or absent during the winter time, and so many of them don't actually survive more than one season. And that is a very neat way of escaping having to deal with the cold. You survive the summer, you lay your eggs in the ground, and then you die. And then you don't have to worry about trying to stay warm or trying to find food when things are a little difficult. Let's get out into the field, as it were. Jamie Patterson is driving down a road in a very swanky new jacket that she has. Let's go and find out what her plans are for the afternoon.
Good afternoon and welcome to our Sunset Safari. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Jamie and I have Brian on camera with me this afternoon. The thumb looking very cool in blue. What's the thumb today, Brian?
Big scarf.
Big scarf! Oh, it is very cold. I'm glad that the thumb is wrapped up nice and warm, because the rest of us are as well. It's been exceptionally chilly over the last 2 days. It's actually been rather unpleasant weather here on Djuma. And nevertheless, I get the feeling that the worst is over. The wind is slowly going, and we've got some exciting things planned for you this afternoon. The wonderful news, of course, from this morning, in case you missed it, was that Mvula was found on Djuma once again. It's been months since I personally last saw him. I think the last person who saw him was Brent before this morning as well. We've got our two master leopard trackers, Brent Leo Smith and Herbert, both on the case of trying to track down and figure out where he went in between the drives. We'll keep our fingers crossed that he makes another appearance this afternoon. I'm going to be checking the northern boundary for a couple of reasons. But the most important is that this morning Abel saw the Nkuhuma lioness that is most definitely denning in the drainage line close to Voyatella, and he saw her returning back to head to her cubs. Now what's interesting about that is just after that the Nkuhuma's made a kill in Buffelshoek itself. So she obviously coming back. If she didn't have babies, she would not be moving south back towards that drainage line and away from the food that the rest of the pride was enjoying. I think that pretty much wraps it up and confirms that she's there. So we're going to head across in that direction to where she was seen crossing, just on the off chance that she might be around. Obviously we can't go wandering about looking for that den site. First of all, we're not going to, for her sake and for their sakes. And second of all, walking at the moment in this weather is not really entirely pleasant. It's actually quite scary. And all of us, when we go out tracking, feel that nerve, or the nerves, when the wind blows. And on the subject of our various leopards, I know when Mvula was left, he was hunting. Winston, a very, very warm welcome to you on this cold and windy day. You are one of our newer viewers and would like to know why leopards take their kills up into trees. So, leopards have a very large percentage of their kills stolen from them. There's something of a hierarchy out here in the bush. There's the lion that sits on top in terms of the predators, and then the wild dog and the spotted hyena that vie for second and third place. And then there is the leopard and then the cheetah underneath that. Now, a leopard is not going to risk injury by trying to fight off a hyena so that they can protect their kill. And so what they do in order to not necessarily prevent but certainly reduce the likelihood of that kill being stolen is they pull it up into a tree. And it's an incredible feat for a leopard. Recent research suggests that more male leopards hoist their kills more often than the females, which makes sense. Males are basically double the size of the females, so it just means that they've got that extra power needed to haul a piece of dead weight right up the tree using their claws and their teeth. Now, chatting a bit about leopards, let us head over to Brent Leo Smith's vehicle to find out how that leopard search is going and whether he's found anything strung up in a tree.
Welcome to Safari Live. My name is Brent Leo Smith. I have them on camera. We've just gone to check the last position where we had that male leopard on the sunrise safari. Unfortunately, a herd of elephants has come through there, probably chased him and also obliterated his tracks. So I left Herbert, our tracker, on foot in the drainage system, and he's going to be trying to find out where those tracks come out from where the elephant herd passed. So he was just in these thickets off to my right here, but we're going to do a bigger loop around in case those elephants chased him a bit further. Now also, it's been a very cool, cold, if you like, day. So leopards could have moved during the day, wouldn't have slept so much. He was also very hungry. He was in an area where there were lots of animals around. So we were hoping maybe he had some luck during this windy weather and he managed to catch himself a meal. Now, this male leopard used to be the dominant male here on Djuma when I started. And then Tingana moved in, it's the new dominant male. Now, as great as it was to see Mvula again, he does pose a threat to all leopard cubs in the area. He's now become a nomadic male. He's not a dispersal male, all sort of dispersal male. Dispersal male is a young male leopard who's pushed out and must go seek his own way. This is an old male leopard. There's a bit of argument about how old he is from the information I have. Some people say he's 11, some people say he's 13. When I look at him, I would say he's closer to 13. If you look at his ears being very ragged, he's not a young male. So, and leopard like that poses a very big danger to female leopards and their cubs. They pop out all over the place. They move around constantly. They're trying to avoid the dominant males. So it can be a bit of a testing time for the females, specifically because we've got Karula with cubs somewhere to the south of us here, and then he's just come through where Shadow's been seen with her cub. So it seems like he managed to pass through without bumping into Shadow. But obviously having him around where Karula hangs out, and of course he used to see a lot of Karula when he was the dominant male. If he happened to find those cubs, it's not 100% chance, but it's very likely that he would eat them. But just in case, he could have gone any direction. So that's why we're going to do a big loop around, make sure his tracks don't pop out anywhere. He might have headed back towards the Buffalo's Hook waterhole. That's the closest water at the moment. While we continue to check, I'm sure you have wondered what the inside of a leopard looks like. Well, at least its head. So let's go have a look with James.
Now, many of you would have seen this already, of course, before. Let me just turn my sound off so I don't have to hear the slightly offensive sound of my own voice. What we're looking at here is a young male leopard skull. And I know some of you have seen this, but some of you won't have. And I just think it's quite interesting because we were talking about the age there of Mvula and how old he could or might be. And the SEM seems, like Brent says, some discrepancy between 11 and 13. My information certainly the way he looks to me indicates about a 13-year-old leopard. This leopard was much younger. Now if you do, and hopefully we will see Mvula again fairly soon, if you look at the teeth here, these teeth are still very sharp. And although they're not nearly as sharp as, say, your house cat's, because his are much smaller, these are very sharp. And these are not the teeth that Mvula is going to have. Mvula will have much blunter teeth from years and years of use, obviously. And likewise, his carnassials, which are these teeth over here, they too will be much blunter than they are on this example of a young male leopard. And I just think it's quite a nice idea here to compare the difference between this skull and the hyena skull. And what we notice, if we look at them backwards, is a noticeably higher, what we call sagittal crest on the back of the hyena skull. Now that sagittal crest over there is where the muscles to chew attach, and there are still some pretty massive muscles there that attach on the leopard skull, but you can see they're much higher on the hyena because, of course, the hyena has got to drive home a much more powerful biting. It's got to drive home a much more powerful biting. I don't think that's English, but you get my drift. And so the leopard is much more, it uses its jaws to ambush and then to kill. And hyena has to carry this enormously massive skull with this huge region of muscle in order for it to bite down and sort of cut, if you like, the bones that it's going to eat. Now, if you look at the two different kinds of teeth here, this is the hyena, this is the leopard, all right? Look at the sharpness of the carnassials on the leopard versus the hyena. The hyenas are flat, blunt chisels in comparison with the leopard, which of course has much sharper teeth, and that's because the leopard largely eats fresh meat. It does not have the adaptation to bite into big bones, whereas of course the hyena does with these blunter teeth. These, of course, would go immediately blunt were the leopard to try and bite into bones. So I think that's quite a nice comparison between the two. Now just remember, although we are sitting in the tent here, and we're certainly a lot more toasty warm than Brent, Leo, Smith and Jamie, you can ask questions of me in the tent, so please feel free to do so on #SafariLive. In the meantime, let's head back to Brent and get an update on what his leopard tracking is going. That is horrible.
Good news, no tracks coming through to the east. I was quite worried that he might have ducked through towards Torchwood, but I haven't seen any tracks yet. This is the last little spot where he might have headed east. And just check very carefully on the road here. Nice soft sand as well, so it makes life a little easier. Okay, so no tracks yet. There is a strong possibility he's still in this block here. When I refer to a block, I mean this little big area between the roads. And this block's got a wonderful little river system in it, a little dry river system, lots of big trees, lots of great places for a leopard to hang out. So we've been chatting about the leopard dynamics at the moment, particularly with this male Mvula, who's a dispersal male, or nomadic male, and Tingana, who's the dominant male in this area. Safari Dean's asking, do I think Tingana will be close behind Mvula to chase him? Tingana actually passed through the property yesterday, so he's actually behind, Mvula's actually behind him, and he'll be listening to those male leopard vocalizations and trying to go to the area where he's least likely to run into one of the dominant males. Let's have a quick look on the road here. We got nothing here. All good signs so far that he hasn't left the area where we had him this morning, and that's really good because Herbert's there on foot, and it's often much easier to find these animals on foot. So you can take your time, follow the tracks carefully. So not so long ago there was a female leopard who was killed, or they suspect was bitten and then died from a snake bite. Christopher was wondering, wasn't it supposed to be Mvula? It wasn't. It was a female leopard called Kwatile. And in about March last year, we actually saw Mvula mating with that female. So I think that's where you might be getting a little bit confused, but Mvula looked pretty healthy this morning. He had a little bit of a limp, starting to sag on the back legs a bit, but that's hips starting to show a bit, but that's not uncommon in older leopards. He could have done a dog leg back up here. I'm going to check at the water hole quickly as well. So the last place I had him was probably 200 meters to the south of us here in that little river system, and he went into a spot that we couldn't take the vehicle in. It was too steep, too thick. Come on, kitty cat. Just really keeping my eyes peeled on the edge of this little river system as we drive. At the same time, making sure I don't miss tracks on the road. Also having a quick glance up into the trees. Maybe he had some success. While I put all my attention on trying to find you guys a leopard, Let's go see what Jamie's up to.
While Brent goes off in search of a spotted cat, I'm looking for a somewhat larger and more tawny of the big cat variety. So she's in here somewhere, and I'm going really nice and slowly, because the nice thing about new mothers, or at least the nice thing about them rather than the nice thing for them, for new leopard moms and lion moms, they get a bit tired of the suckling, mewling babies that they have to look after, and what they'll often do is leave the babies in the den site and move a little bit away from it to have a moment to rest and relax, kind of like a tired and overworked mom having a bit of space, maybe a bit of spa time.
Well, you're back with me. It seems like Jamie's got a few gremlins. So we've come out of where we last saw him. I saw my off-road tracks. I'm just checking now to make sure he hasn't doubled back on us and appeared on the road and headed towards the waterhole. The windy, cold weather is probably quite good for him. Then the spotted zebras. I haven't seen them yet. Oh, there they are. Well spotted. Now, how's that for him? So you notice they're all around that large termite mound there. And they're taking advantage of some of the grass that's still growing on the edge of it. Looks like chorus grass. Not the most palatable of grasses, but it is a drought. One must not be too fussy. And zebras are not fussy feeders. They're bulk grazers, so they're not too picky about what they eat. Other species will be very, very picky about what they eat in terms of grass type. For example, wildebeest, very fussy. They only like short grass and they only like certain species. And the most fussy of eaters, the most fussy eaters of all, probably roan and sable in South Africa. And most of their diet consists of one species of love grass. Now imagine if you saw in black and white and you didn't see detail. What I'd like you to do is try squint your eyes when you're looking at the screen, and you can see how that black and white camouflage looks like it wouldn't really work for us. But if you imagine all the leaves not being green and everything being black and white, you'll see that that camouflage actually works quite well. We're going to keep checking for this male leopard, but while we leave one large bulk grazer, Jamie's got another.
I have several large bulk grazers in this case. A herd of probably close to 150 odd buffalo, including this female with a blind right eye. I don't quite know what happened to cause that. Maybe a cataract, maybe some kind of damage in her youth. Not all that uncommon to see buffalo with injured eyes. We're actually going to go. We're not going to stay with these buffalo now, and I'll explain to you exactly why. So before I disappeared off your screen, we were talking a bit about buffalo and the fact that they walked all over this road and obscured the lioness's tracks. I think her den is in here, and I want to go and see how this situation plays out as these buffalo make their way in there. And it's not unheard of for buffalo to seek out and to either kill or injure lion cubs in their den site, kind of as a way of sort of like, well, we're going to, it's all right, buffalo, it's okay. you know, we'll kill you before you can get big and kill us kind of deal. Now, I suspect that the lioness is on either side of this drainage line somewhere. I want to just go and investigate because these buffalo are coming straight in. If the mother is there, she will either stay still. Let's go over to James.
Now, we've come over here, of course, I was going to tell you a bit about herbivore dentition as we were talking all about those bulk grazers, but before we do that, just have a quick look here. Over my shoulder, Gert's going to show you what I've got under the microscope here. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? It's something called a lime green hawk moth, and that's its head. And this is a Mrs. lime green hawk moth. We know that from her antenna there, which are not combs. So you can see they're pretty straight and toothed, but a male, which has antenna specially designed to pick up pheromones that are exuded by a female like this, has got a long antenna with sort of a wide comb on it. So this is Mrs. Moth. Mrs. Moth is equally as beautiful as Mr. Moth, and I'll show you the whole picture of him now, or her, sorry. There she is. Isn't that an astonishing colour? Just amazing. And quite possibly a diurnal moth. I don't know much about their biology, if anything, but probably a diurnal moth given that colour. And probably tree dwelling, you would think, given the amazing colour. So that is the lime green hawk moth. I'm going to put him back in, put her back in her jar. And you'll notice just on my finger there, Gert, you'll notice how it's gone green. And that's from the scales. Now, although you looked like the moth had hair on it, they don't have hair on them. It's scales, and they come off as soon as you touch a moth. And many of you will know that, of course, because when the moth flaps over your face as you're sitting outside of an evening around a campfire, and you do that sort of thing, you know that the moth leaves this kind of dustiness on you. It's not normally that pretty green colour. Now, I have in another jar over here a herbivore tooth. And this, I believe, to be a buffalo tooth. And let's just have a look at it. Now, a bulk grazer like a buffalo, in fact, most herbivores will have teeth like this. This particular buffalo was A, old, and B, I think had probably been at the toffees for a little while. But you can see there the different parts of the tooth. Now, that sort of, how do we describe it? Plain white, crystal white, clean white colour is the enamel, and inside that, of course, is the dentine. Now, a tooth like this will grow throughout the buffalo's life. It has to, because the buffalo is grinding its teeth together day after day after day after day. So it has to keep growing. And if you leave, for example, if domestic horses, which don't obviously use their teeth anything like wild animals like zebras would, you have to file their teeth because their teeth keep growing. And it's the same with the buffalo, especially the bulk grazers, which have to eat a huge amount of, as Brent was saying, not fussy about what they eat, but they swallow their things, re-chew them again and again and again and again. So they have to have very sophisticated teeth. Brent has got a really special bird to show you.
Wow, look at this. These are female red-headed weavers, but there's a whole host of species here. And I think it might add a few more birds to your bird list, but I'm pretty sure there's a snake here somewhere, judging from the bird's behavior. I haven't been able to spot the shape. Oh, there's a bushwhack there. Oh, he's popping down. There we go, look at that. Orange-breasted bushwhack by the looks of things. Very pretty bird. We've got orange-breasted bird. I'd come to the right a little bit. Oh, you see, oh, he's flying off to the back there. Oh, there he is. That's a brew shrike. So that's 3 species we've got so far. I'm just still trying to see. They're alarming like mad in the center. What have you spotted, Vim? Ah. Right, it's a little crombeck. 4 species. Now, let's go back to the center of this little knobthorn. A little bit to the right slightly, I think. Where's he hopping about? Now, the way they were behaving, there was a snake around. It might have moved off, but they were all alarming incessantly. And they're still alarming behind us. Let's just go back a little bit. Maybe there's a snake that's moving along the ground. No, I can't see anything. Then we got 4 species in there. There were about 7. Okay, well, something around here. And sometimes you'll find the little birds alarming like that for a leopard. But in this case, I just think from the behavior, it was a snake. Just hang on 1 second. I'm gonna have one last quick look. But nope, can't see anything. So from the tiny little birds, let's go back to Jamie on those large bovids.
Brian and myself find ourselves completely surrounded by our large bovids, making their way slowly through and over the crossing of the Mulwati drainage line. And there are some really, really interesting buffalo. Unfortunately, the one that I was interested in showing you, or really wanted to show you, has now disappeared off into the bushes. There's a young male buffalo with, I think, the biggest set of horns I have ever seen of a buffalo of that age. He's going to be an absolute monster when he grows older. Enormous. The nice thing about us sitting here is that we get to view these animals while they're perfectly relaxed, because they've decided to come to us rather than the other way around. We just had to park off and wait for them to come past. The good news is, for those of you who are worrying, is I haven't seen any signs of a frantic lioness rushing out of the area. I haven't seen or heard any buffalo panic. It doesn't look as though they've even smelt lion at this point. But perhaps she has moved her den a little bit further to the north of this drainage line. I think they would have given us some kind of indication that they had found her. Everybody looks perfectly relaxed and perfectly calm. I said about 150. I'm going to up the estimate to about 200 buffalo that have just walked past. And bulls and cows of all ages, including a couple of little stragglers coming through at the back. Might need to reposition for you to see them, but we've got a view of them so far. They are going into they're going further north than I expected to, which is the other area where I thought she might have had a den site. We don't know exactly for certain. But we'll just do a nice loop around this area and just keep checking in case she has been pushed out. There's a very, very young calf. One of the last of this season, I would say. Yes, little one, with your cute horns. Off you go, into the safety of the herd. It doesn't pay to be a straggler out here. And that's just like that. A herd of 200 odd buffalo slowly melting into the bush. The females very clearly distinguishable from the males, with their tufts of hair in between their horns. Males having much more solid horn bases, or bosses, as they are known. There's some hip bones showing, some ribs showing. Starting to feel the effects of the drought. and the lack of the food of the dry season, which you've seen. We've stopped quite a few times and had a look at what little grass there is left for these bulk grazers to eat. So while they head off and struggle along to see if they can find their next meal, let's find out what James is up to in the tent.
I'm not struggling, of course, because I'm warm here in our toasty little tent, but we're going to try something new now. As many of you will know, I am the world's worst artist, but that has not stopped me making valiant attempts at art at various stages. Now, we had a question from Debbie in Vancouver about the geology of the area, so I'm going to try and give you a very quick idea of what the geology of the area looks like. And I'm going to do the whole Kruger Park, and then we'll do a little section on the Sabi Sands. So, here we go. The Kruger Park basically looks like this, with a boot at the end of it. Looks like something like that. Yeah, that's a brilliant description, don't you think? Gert? Yes? It's magnificent, isn't it? The Sabi Sands sits over here. The Timbavati sort of over around there, and the Manyeleti in the middle. That's absolutely appalling. It's proportionately completely off whack. Wait 1 second, everyone. Where's my tissue gone? I have to do this again. Okay. Okay. Sabi Sands actually probably like that. Manyeleti thin piece there. Timbavati over there. That's all you need to know. So this is the K and P. Now, Debbie, this is largely granite, and over here we're going to draw the Drakensberg Mountains. They pretty much come down here like that, and of course, because we're looking at it from the top, I'm not going to try and draw peaks. We'll just do this. That means mountain, everybody, right? Mountains. And then over here we have some more mountains, but these ones are smaller, as you can see from my brilliant representation of smaller mountains. There we go. And now we will get some more colors. So this is the Drakensberg here, D-Berg. These ones are called the Lobombo Mountains. Okay, and between the two is what we call the Lowveld. Now most of this is granite. The Drakensberg, Debbie, is made of basalt. This is largely granite. Right, and the Lobombo Mountains are something called rhyolite. Okay, and obviously this makes different kinds of vegetation wherever you happen to be. So if you go into the far eastern sectors of the Kruger National Park, you will see different kinds of vegetation. Now that's the basic idea of what happens here. It's very basic. So let me just quickly zoom in now to the Sabi Sand, and you'll get an idea of what it is here. Now it's different here because, or at least it's not different on Djuma. On Djuma it's entirely granite. There's nothing else here, and that's why the vegetation looks quite similar over here. But the whole Sabi Sands, which looks something like like that, that's actually not too bad. Not a bad guess there. Sand River coming down through here, Sabi River coming down through here, and they meet somewhere over there. We won't worry about that particular section. But this northern section, Djuma sits about, that's Buffelshoek, so Djuma's about there, right? That's where we are. And, sorry, Burmy, you want to know where north, south, east, west is. There's north. Okay, south down here, obviously west here, east here. That's an amazingly terrible drawing. Nkoro Cheetah Plains, so I'm going to put CP here, and we're going to have Arathusa here. Okay, that is a very sort of cartoon rendition of where we are. That's all granite, every piece of it here. When you come all the way down to the south here, sort of beyond this section here, you get what we call gabbro. And many of you, of course, know or will think of Africa as having these large, vast open clearings like the Serengeti in Kenya. Well, there aren't those sorts of clearings out here, but in the gabbros, there do tend to be a lot more open clearings, very long grass, dominated by a really good grazing grass called red grass or Themida triandra, and knobthorn trees, which you'll all be very familiar with. The granite, which extends all the way up here, and then the gabbros do start again as you go into the Manyeleti, but basically that's how it looks here in the Sabi Sand. There is one noticeable exception, of course, here on Cheetah Plains at the southern end, just there, that goes into Mala Mala. And that noticeable exception is a giant sodic area where the geology is probably still granite, but there's some kind of underground geological formation that allows for those big clearings to maintain because the area is so sodic. There's a lot of sodium and clay in the soil. So Debbie, that's the basic idea of the geology. Okay, let's head across to Brent and get an update from him.
We've done another loop around the same area, now the zebra a bit closer to the road, as well as some waterbuck. You can see the area they're all feeding on at the moment. It's a little bit more open than the rest of the bush. It's on the edge of the thickets coming down from the top. So it is a seep line, so the grass species there are going to be better. I think I'm just going to move forward a little bit. Might get a better view. Big bird. Big bird. We like big birds. It's a very... It's African hawk eagles. There's a pair of them. Next one should be coming through. There we go. Nice for them. African hawk eagles. Quite often we see them in pairs. And they actually nest on the next road over. And one of my favorite bird species, great hunters of francolin and guinea fowl and squirrels. What is that zebra doing? Is he having a scratch? You see him? I mean, having a good scratch against the stump there. Getting rid of some itchy ticks, I'm sure. Changing position slightly. Oh, that looks good. It's really working that stump. Of course, most animals are not blessed with opposable thumbs and fingers. So to have a scratch, you've got to find the closest rough object, maybe not too rough, that you can rub against. It all depends on how thick your skin is. So different animals have different rubbing posts. Oh, it's just swapped sides, rubbing the other side now. So I just had a chat to Herb on the radio, who's trying to find Mvula for us. He's walking down here. Now, he said, unfortunately, the elephants have literally obliterated all the tracks. So he's going to try go back to where we last saw him and then try figure out from there. So what we're going to do, in case he continued south, we're going to head down towards the Mawati River. Oh, but before we do that, there we go. Look at that little bundle of fluffy cuteness. Baby waterbuck. And we see the white rings on their bottom. I know a lot of our regular viewers will know exactly what that's for, but that's a following mechanism, so they're able to follow each other through the thick bush. There's a male at the back. See his big horns. And all the animals are going to be very alert today in this windy weather. So from one male antelope to another with Jamie.
Oh dear, it seems as though you were with us a bit sooner than I realized for some unknown reason. Our communications went a little bit strange there. Nevertheless, we have two posturing male impala nibbling away at the leaves. And it's fascinating to watch them at this point because their hormones are starting to slow down at the end of their breeding season. They're not rushing about as madly as they were, but at the same time, every time a male runs past another, they get a bit of a fright and immediately go into battle mode. And just before you came across to us, the two of them locked horns, and one of them actually was thrown to the ground in front of the car. Got up very quickly and disentangled themselves very quickly. There are no females around here for them to fight, so it's more just a residual hormonal outburst that they had. A little bit of residual aggression towards each other. Let's go forward a little bit and see if we can't get a view of the second impala as well. So I've done a double check, just to let you know what I've been up to. I've been doing a double check of the area around where the buffalo came through, past where we suspect that lioness's den site is. And there was no sign of any action, no sign of any tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on for now and then make my way back there towards the evening time to see if she might be on her way out to find her sisters on Torchwood, by the sounds of things. Here we go, keeping a modest distance from each other. I was looking at photos of an antelope called a Geranook or a Geranook, depending on where you are and how you pronounce it. It's an antelope that you get up towards Somalia and the Eastern African, sort of Central and East African regions, that so very clearly came from an impala in some, or at least shares an ancestor with an impala, that it's absolutely phenomenal. And what this antelope looks like is, if you picture this impala and then with a really, really stretched neck and really, really stretched legs. And that is what this particular antelope looks like. Now, I don't happen to have a picture of it, but Brent might be able to show you one when you head back onto his vehicle. You can see what I mean about what a fascinating creature it is, and why I say that it is so clear that it shares some kind of ancestor with our impala that we have here. And sometimes I wish we could trace back the history and go back in time and just see the way in which things worked, because there's quite a distance between our impala, physical difference I mean, physical distance. There's a difference between distance between our impala and where this particular species of antelope roams. And what it does is it actually stands on its back legs and nibbles away at the leaves. It's phenomenal to see. Go. I think our impala are going to disappear off, so I think that we should continue on and see what we can see. I think there's a chance that if your questions are coming through to me, I might not be hearing them, so forgive me. I'm not ignoring you. On the subject of impala skulls, or impala, James has an impala skull to show you.
Here it is, everybody, an impala skull. It's a very dainty little piece of equipment, is the impala skull. And what interests me so much about this, of course, is that impala do a great deal of fighting just before this time of the year. So around about April and May, they have a horrible time with each other. Some of them are still boxing each other, but they're wasting their time, because those that are pregnant, female-wise, of course, are indeed already pregnant. Now, if you look at the front side of the skull here, it looks so very dainty, I always think, and yet impala smash each other with such an incredible force when they're fighting that I do wonder how it is and how they don't sort of concuss themselves completely. And the skull is not thick here. It's only that thick, but that's solid bone, and it's much thicker than your skull at the front of the head. So if you were to sort of knock your head, I think at anything like the velocity and force with which the impala smash each other's heads, I think our skulls would probably crack up. What really interests me is how they manage not to concuss themselves. James Dungan, it's an interesting one. I don't know the answer. You want to know which horns of antelope did humans use as weapons? You know, James, in this particular area, I don't think they did use horns as weapons, because once the animal dies, of course, this keratin sheath will eventually start to rot, and so it's actually not that strong. It will snap and break fairly soon after the animal dies if it's not fed with nutrients. Underneath it, there is bone, but bone is brittle. You know, if bone dries and it is no longer living, then it becomes very brittle. But what they did used to use, of course, before the advent of the Iron Age, was something like this. Now, this is called a hand axe, and you know, you can read books and books and books, not many of which I've read, about what these things were used for and who built them and how they were built. No one really knows for sure, but you can be very sure that although this was probably very effective at crushing roots to eat, I think that was definitely a major function of something like this hand axe. It was probably also just as effective as for bludgeoning someone to death. And so I think you'll find that this was a sort of a knife, a fork, a spoon, and also an axe, and possibly also a defensive weapon. I mean, if you tie a piece of stick to this, it becomes a very effective kind of axe. No longer a hand axe, but very effective axe. And so I think far from using these sorts of bones, I think people probably used this sort of thing, and they eventually, of course, became spears, much more refined than this particular one. And then with the advent of the Iron Age, and Iron Age people have been living in this area for probably 1,500 years. And so with the advent of the Iron Age, of course, well, then spears were the things that people wanted to use rather than stones and bones to attack each other with. Let's, before I tongue-tie myself completely, let's head across to Brent Leo Smith and find out what he has to tell you.
We are still in search of that male leopard. I'm going to check down towards the Mawati River, see if he maybe wasn't pushed further to the south by those elephants. But wasn't that hand axe incredible and massive? And we'll chat about it a little bit later, because I hear Jamie's got an animal with a heartbeat.
We do indeed have a heartbeat hiding behind the trees. In this case, one of my absolute favorite antelope, a bushbuck. As you can see, a little bit panicked by our prolonged attention of her hiding spot. And just like that, off she goes in very typical bushbuck fashion, trying to hide herself as deeply in the dense vegetation as possible. And that bushbuck has given us a really clear indication of what most of the animals are doing on a day like today. And that is hiding away wherever they can, trying to shelter from the wind. And in this case, a drainage line or a river system, you can sort of clearly see where rivers would have flown through, or at least have hewn away at the soil. And it provides a perfect spot to shelter from the wind. If you're a leopard, it provides a perfect spot to come and hunt. And if you're a lioness, it provides a perfect place for a den site. Well, speaking of our various little antelope, fox hat, you were wondering about whether or not we have a springbuck in South Africa. And the answer is, in the Sabi Sand. The answer is we don't in the Sabi Sand, we do in South Africa. They are more of an arid species, so they essentially fill the same ecological niche as something like an impala. They're quite a similar size, just a little bit smaller, but they're more towards the western and northwestern parts of this country, and then actually right down towards the Karoo as well, around the area around Cape Town. They're amazing animals. They look very similar sort of structure to an impala, but with that very thick black stripe that runs along the side. And their name comes from a very particular type of prancing that they do, a type of stotting. Now, stotting antelope do when they want to show you how energetic they are. It's the equivalent of, I don't know, what would be a good example? Perhaps boys doing Nyala dance around fireside chat, or possibly sprinting along quarantine. Either way, that's the antelope equivalent, is stotting. And springbuck do something known as pronking, which is where they arch their back right up and draw their legs together and spring in a kind of very, very peculiar, very fascinating stride. And it's their way of basically saying to everything else, I'm incredibly healthy, I'm nice and strong, look how high I can jump, don't even bother trying to hunt and catch me. Unlike our bushbuck that pull disappearing acts, as she has done. Camp bushbuck that live around, I can't remember what he called it now. There are several that hang out around the windows. Over to Brent for an update on his search.
We're on our way down towards the Mawati River. I just wanted to check on the southern side of that little river system that he was in. Maybe he kept on going down it. And I was just saying that hand axe James had is amazing. Now, early Stone Age. Imagine how powerful you would have had to have been to use that to break things open. And that particular hand axe is from not too far away from here. Probably about 60 kilometers or so. My dad found it while he was out walking. It's a sort of a family hobby, looking for different stone tools and fossils and things. What you got? Oh, there we go. There's the hawk eagles that flew over us earlier. Oh, beautiful. A pair of African hawk eagles. Oh, and you can hear there's a grey-headed bushshrike who's not happy with them in the presence. That ooh. Oh, and there's some more birds that are not happy with them, landing around them. White helmet shrikes. They're basically going to harass them. Look at that. Now there's no chance that these eagles will be able to catch those little birds. They're just too fast. But they don't like any predators hanging about where they are. I don't know, Vim, can you pick up that? Ooh, ooh. Can't really hear it, but there's beautiful, beautiful grey-headed bush shrikes that are alarm calling. I'm trying to see if I can get a spot one of them. Actually, I think I've got their call. They're probably going to batten down the hatches for the evening, the hawk eagles. Unless they see an unsuspecting Franklin. I'm just going to move a little bit forward. Let's see if we can spot one of these bush shrikes. So I'm just listening. There's a pair of them calling. And Vim's going to keep looking at those beautiful hawk eagles, and I'll try to spot that little bit of movement. Oh, there he flew. Damn it. Oh, he flew off the They flew off into the thicket. Let's see if we can get forward. Now, to see both the grey-headed and the orange-breasted in one game drive, I think that'll be a little bit of a birding coup for getting them on camera. Oh no, it sounds like they've moved further away. Well, we tried. Really? You got him. Damn, thinks he might have spotted them. Yes, well done, Jim.
There he is.
Oh no, it's another orange-breasted. But he's got something. So we thought we got that. So we were looking for the grey-headed, but we got the orange-breasted. Well spotted, Vim. So actually, it gives me an idea. So both of them have an orange breast and a grey head, which makes them quite confusing with the naming. But the grey-headed's a far more robust bird. And it's much bigger beak. It's a bigger bushshrike. And just quickly undo. Okay, so there's the one we've just seen, the orange-breasted bushshrike, up the top there, where my thumb is. And we could see that yellow stripe quite distinctly there in that. And then if we come down to the bottom here, there's the grey-headed bushshrike, who's also got an orange breast and a grey head, but you can see he's got a yellow eye, much bigger than the orange-breasted bushshrike. Now the real coup to catch, if we ever got lucky enough to see this one, this would be a really awesome bird to see here, the black-fronted bushshrike. I have seen them in the Timbavati. I've never seen them in the Sabi Sands. You can see where they occur. Very, very rare to find them. But I have seen them not too far from here, but it would be quite strange if we did find one. It's one to aspire to. Well, pretty good birds for a cold, windy day. Andreen is wondering about the bird we saw in the beginning. Can I give its name? It was an orange-breasted bushshrike. We also saw a brew shrike, and that could be the one, B-R-U. They've got a call that sounds like an old-school telephone ringing. And then what else did we see? There was a little crombeck, and not sure what. We had 4 species managed to get on camera there. Bushshrike, crombeck, brew. Do you remember what the 4th was, Vim? Oh, I can't remember now. And on the edge of this... Ah, there we go. A female red-headed weaver was the other one. Now, I'm not quite sure what's happening in the tent, apart from the fact that James is nice and cozy with all his lights keeping him warm. So I think he's doing a bit of exercise with a large piece of the earth.
We are not nice and cozy, everybody. We are stoutly out exploring the wilderness, not, well, about 2 meters from the tent. Now, Laura in Oregon, you were wondering about the soil, and you said, why is it so infertile, and couldn't we have earthworms to help us here? Well, Laura, if you have a look down here, I'm going to sit down just to show you that I am, you know, still in touch with the earth. I haven't totally been taken over by the comforts of the tent. This soil here, now let me just bring it closer, of course, because we've been replaced, Gert's been replaced on camera by Hoppy Pussfoot here, and he's fairly immobile. There we go, Hoppy. Do you see the soil? Now, Laura, what you can see by this is that there's not a lot of organic material in it. You can see that it's very kind of pale, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's nutrient poor, but in this case it is. And by saying that the soil of the Lowveld is nutrient poor, it means basically that there's been so little recent volcanic activity in this area that there's not much in the way of new minerals. So when soil like this is exposed to the elements for millennia, eventually most of the nutrients will leach out of it. The clay will leach down and it becomes poor. Now, in order to revitalize, if you like, the soil, basically you have to have the presence of volcanic activity, and so ash, which would bring up minerals from the bottom of the surface. You'd bring up minerals from the underneath the earth. I'm getting totally tongue-tied here. Bring up minerals from the subsurface of the earth onto the ground, and that would then provide you with fertile soils. Now, all over Southeast Asia, that's what you have. And it's not surprising, therefore, that there are so many more people living there than there are in Africa. And the other way that you get sort of fertility into soils is with organic material. So in a rainforest area, you will have a top surface of soil that is very nutrient rich, but underneath that, it's often very nutrient poor because of the amount of rain that there is in a rainforest. So in an area like this, you do not have a great deal of fertility, and it means that the animals have adapted to living without these sorts of fertile lands, but it does mean that the people outside have to, it's very difficult to grow food here, and it's very difficult to grow sort of nutrient-rich food. So you can grow spinach quite happily, but that spinach will be calcium poor, it will be iron poor if you don't fertilize the soil with it. And I think that's quite interesting, because what it does mean is that African populations have almost universally remained poorer than, or certainly lower than most other populations around the world, certainly than in Asia, with the notable exception, of course, of Rwanda and Burundi and the sort of eastern sections of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In those mountains, there are active volcanoes, or recently active volcanoes, and it's no surprise at all that those are the most densely populated areas in all of Africa. Out here, however, in the Lowveld especially, this was an ancient sea many thousands of years ago, in fact millions of years ago, and since then there's been no volcanic activity at all, and so the soil has been leaching for millennia, and that's why it's just not very nutrient rich. And that is my story of the soil, Laura. Now, let's pop back inside the tent. Come, Hoppy, don't fall over yourself. Be careful, there's a guy rope there. If the picture does shake slightly, it's because Hoppy is hopping. That's what he does. I wanted to show you this amazing bone that I picked up. Now, the bone itself was belonged to a buffalo. Well, it's two bones, isn't it? And what it is the humerus, not the humerus. I cannot get this right in my head. Anyway, it's the leg bone. This is the femur of the buffalo, and this is the tibia, right? And what's interesting to me about this is this articulation. You see how the bone articulates in its ball and socket? And I'm just going to turn it around like that. And there, that sort of piece of stinky flesh that you can see, that's not stinky at all anymore, that's a ligament. Okay? You see it holding together? That's what holds your bones together. A ligament just like that one, and very sinewy, not very good to eat, of course, except for maybe one or two vultures and a couple of insects, and that's the last thing to go. And it just shows you how tough ligaments are, because they have to hold your bones together, and it's why a ligament injury, if you ever have one, in your knee or your ankle specifically, is so tremendously painful. Just one last thing on this. This is the equivalent of your ankle joint, okay? So it's the back leg. If you imagine a whole buffalo, this is its back leg, okay? And that's the sort of ankle joint. That's the kind of fetlock, what you'd call on a horse. That's the fetlock. And so that's the ankle joint. And you can see how totally different it is from the ankle joint of a human being. This, yes, you see, so I've got this all mixed up again. This basically is an amalgamation of the tarsal joints in your foot, which I think is absolutely incredible. I'm going to get back to you. At least I'm going to explain a bit more about that when we next come back to the tent. But in the meantime, I think Brent Leo Smith is appropriately... Oh, he's not in the boat today, is he? No, he's in Rusty, but he is having a little boat ride. Let's go and find out what he's doing.
It's actually so bumpy here. There have been so many elephants. The road is actually quite bumpy. We have to go quite slowly. Don't rattle our false teeth out. Herbert's still trying to find Mvula. While he does that, I think we're probably going to try and find the elephants that might have chased him. And so we're on their tracks at the moment. You can see here, and we can feel it now. Watch this. Normally you get into the ruts here and the car just stays. You don't even have to use the steering wheel. But now the elephants, there have been so many elephants here. And the car's wandering around. Because it's sometimes quite a harsh environment out here in the bush, and a male will kill a competitor's babies to try and get the female to come into estrus. We're talking about the carnivores mostly. Now, Annie in British Columbia is wondering, are there any male predators that might accept the offspring of another male? In very rare circumstances, certain animals will. Now, one animal that does all the time, but there's sort of a loophole, is cheetah. Now, male cheetah coalitions, only the dominant male in the coalition will do any mating. So, but it's a direct relation to the other members of the coalition. They're almost always brothers. So that doesn't really count. And if they come across a female who's got cubs and they haven't mated with her, they will also, not always, that's the cheetah, a funny one, not always, but sometimes they will kill the cubs. And I'm just trying to think, out of the bigger predators, not really, they don't really accept other males' babies within their territory. Of course, they're programmed, evolved to pass on their genetic code, so that's what they're doing. And if they kill the babies, then it immediately causes the female to come into estrus. Hang on, I've heard a pretty little bird here. I can hear them calling, tink, 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 tink. Let's see if we can get a visual of them. Psh, 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 psh. That normally causes some of the little birds to pop out.
Not the yoke up there.
Nope, but we can get that one. Them spotted a different bird. Oh, he flew. That was a grey-headed sparrow. Let's just go forward a little bit. I'm looking for a little flycatcher. You can hear them somewhere in here. Oh, there's a couple of different bird species we go through. Oh, it was a white helmet shrike, but go back into that. Oh, there we go. Those are the same birds that were bombing the hawk eagles earlier. Okay, well, the Battises are too far away. We'll keep going. Birding in this weather is quite challenging. Hello, Gracie. Gracie is a Safari Live regular and is 8 years old. Gracie would like to know, are the cinnamon bun birds all gone? Now, if you're wondering what a cinnamon bun bird is, it's a cinnamon-breasted bunting. They're not all gone, Gracie. They are around, but I haven't seen one in a while. But I know they're your favorite, Gracie, so I'll show you a picture just so you don't forget what they look like. Here we go. There we go. That's the cinnamon bun bird or a cinnamon-breasted bunting. That is the male. So they are around. We could see them any time. You can see that dark green is where they will be for the majority of the year, but the light green, they spread out during the winter months. So they might have spread out a bit looking for more to eat because of the drought, but I'm sure there's still some around within our Traverse area. One of the last times I actually saw Mvula, when he was still the dominant male leopard in this area, was right here during Big Cat Week. I saw him on foot and he growled at me, naughty leopard. Now, a very interesting question posed by Michelle in New Jersey. She's saying, are we sure Karula didn't mate with Mvula when he was hanging around late last fall? I think it was the beginning of summer for us. She might have, but there would have been no reason for her to mate with him when he's no longer the dominant. And the other thing, even if those are his cubs, he's in that stage of his life where he'll take a meal wherever he can get it. So eating a cub would be a nice, easy source of protein for him. So it's unlikely. It's unlikely that he fathered those cubs. There's always a small possibility. But with male leopards at that phase of their life, they are well-known cub killers and cub eaters. Now, as you can see, this is now twin dams, and it's been fixed up and excavated. It's become quite an impressive spot. It'd be lovely once there's some water in it. I think, Vim, you should get your skateboard.
That's what I was thinking.
You can have a skateboard rink in here. Whee! And then you can do a jump over there. You need an off-road skateboard.
I think it's sandboarding.
Sandboarding. Yes, that's an idea.
Matter of fact, we should come tomorrow.
Yes, we should come tomorrow, definitely, after sunrise safari. And some impala boys hanging around the new dam. Maybe they gallop up and down and do tricks when we're not looking. I think they're more concerned with staying alive at the moment. You can see, not very relaxed with the wind scampering off. Oh, well, we're going to continue our search for those elephants. And while we do that, let's go to the warm and toasty James Henry inside the tent.
As with yesterday, he really can't get over the fact that we are nice and warm over here. Well, you know, that's just how it goes. Some people are destined to drive around staring at the sand in the freezing cold, and others are destined to be in the tent, warm and happy, and some hoppy. Hoppy just fell over the camera, everybody. We had to put it all back together. Anyway, now I just want to go through this again because I got it wrong again. I'm not a skeletal anatomist, you see. This is the tibia. Now the tibia is the equivalent of your calf bone, which in my case is very insubstantial. But Hoppy, of course, has a calf the size of Bournemouth. Don't know why I decided Bournemouth was the correct thing to say, but it's very big. Now, so that's what this bone is. Now, it's positioned on the buffalo at the top of the leg, though. Then, you have got inside your foot, you've got a number of different bones. You've got things called tarsals and metatarsal bones. And the metatarsals are the long bits that eventually get to your toes. And on the buffalo, they are fused into this bone here. Right? And I think that's absolutely incredible. So those 5 metatarsal bones that you have in your foot are fused into this one bone in the buffalo, and indeed in just about every single 4-legged animal. And then, look over here, that's your heel. That's the same thing. It's called a I've forgotten it again. It's the heel. That's all you need to know. That's the heel. All right? So that's the buffalo. Now, quite coincidentally, we have the same sized bone, or the same kind of bone, of the elephant version. Now, this I'm going to go with elephant tibia on, and if you look at the shape next to the buffalo, you can see that it's the same, except that it's obviously much longer. And so this would have articulated or joined onto an elephant's femur, so that will be the thigh bone of the elephant, and we actually have one up on the top there, which because I only have 2 hands, I'm unable to retrieve it for you and show you how it would articulate with this particular bone. And then this would go onto exactly the same arrangement, this kind of fused metatarsal situation that we have there. And I just think that that's rather fantastic to know because, well, I just find it interesting. You might not, but I do. Now, the other thing I want to show you, of course, is something much smaller. If you could just zoom in there on the screen, Hoppy. If you could just, there we go, well done. Okay, now, that, everybody, is the mouth of a weevil. Now, many of you will have seen alien films before. Many of you will have watched things like District 9, where you had those prawn sort of cricket-like bipedal aliens, and their mouths looked exactly like that. And so many alien films you see have that kind of terrifying mouth on them when we see alien creatures. And it's because they do look so very terrifying. And people are so very terrified of insects. But they really are quite harmless, most of them, and they really are quite beautiful. This is a weevil. And like I said to you yesterday, he died, unfortunately, because of the cold. And then he was kind of helped along his way by Geraldine the cheesecake, who put him in the freezer. And there he has got his eyes and his beautiful mouth parts and his unbelievably detailed little carapace. I think he's a fantastic creature. Right, Brent Leo Smith is still driving along, hopefully going to find Mvula fairly soon. Let's go and find out how his search is going.
I'm heading back towards where we last left Herbert, and we're going to have another last look, but it is really difficult with all those elephants in that area. I think it might be worth popping up towards Buffels Hook again to see if there's any sign around the water. But it's been so cool today, he probably hasn't needed to drink since he drank this morning. And then we might head further to the west. Oh! Hello, mister. A big male giraffe. Feeding off a buffalo thorn. You can see he's quite a dark individual. Quite an old individual, you can see that by his face. And you can see, without having to look at the obvious bits, just his size tells me that it's a male. Quite a lot taller than a a female. They're actually incredible animals. So to be that size is quite a thing. Now, if we have another look at their legs, you can see how tight the skin is. Now, it's very tight like that to stop the blood flowing too fast down their legs. And also the first ever supersonic jet suits and space suits. The underside that keeps tight to your skin to help control the blood when you're traveling at those incredible speeds was designed based off the structure of a giraffe's legs and their skin.
G-force suit.
A G-force suit, thank you. Yes, I don't know the technical terms for such things. A G-force suit, there we go. Now there are 9 different subspecies of giraffe that we know of so far, and they've all got slightly different patterns. And like most animals out here, no giraffe has the same set of blotches and splotches as the other. So if we have a quick look here then before we have a look at another giraffe. So if we have a look, there's the different sort of colorations and splotches. Here's our one here. So we're the South African, which is, you can see the range of them. And then up in northern Botswana you get the Angolan. But in terms of how they look, very, very similar. And there's the Maasai giraffe, which is, you can see, far more intricate. And then that is the reticulated giraffe, so very distinctly different from the others. Now that's Rothschild's, and the last one is the West African giraffe. So really fascinating. So there are slight genetic differences between those giraffe species. And he's still munching away happily. Now, our giraffe, South African variation, is not endangered at all and is quite widely distributed within its home range, both in protected areas and on private reserves and private game farms. Now, the West African giraffe is under quite a lot, is in quite a lot of trouble. They occur through the Sahel zone, which is the savanna zone above the Central African forests. And unfortunately, a lot of the areas that they occur have been very heavily poached and war-torn for many years. And there he is, walking down the road. Now, as he walks away, he's not facing us, unfortunately, but just look at him up at his head. Now you can see those protrusions and bumps and stuff on those horns. Now James is going to show you a little bit of a much closer view of what's actually going on there.
This is my old buffalo friend here. I'm going to put him over here on the shelf next to, well, close to the head. Not the same animal, of course, or same species, but different animal. Now, we have made extensive use of this giraffe skull over the last year or so. But let's have another look at him, just because he's such a cleverly magnificent fellow. And there are 2 things to check here. First of all, the amazingness of the skull, just the size of it. Look, I mean, I guess you don't get the impression of the size of a giraffe skull from watching it on the screen, but I mean, this skull is the same size as my torso. So now, I'm not a very big fellow, but I'm not that small. It's the same size as my torso, which I think is quite impressive, really, don't you, Jean-Andre?
Yeah.
for old Hoppy. And then the other thing, before we get into the detail of the skull, yesterday, or 2 days ago, sorry, we found, living in this skull, we found a little piece of wax, and into that little piece of wax went a stingless bee. And so inside the brain case of this giraffe is a small colony of stingless bees. Now those stingless bees are going to be totally immobile in weather like this, and so I think we'll have to wait for them to heat up before they start to come out again. I noticed that the entrance is actually closed now, but that tiny little drop of wax there was made by a stingless bee, and they do make honey, and they'll probably make honey inside this giraffe when there's some pollen for them to collect and nectar from the flowers, but until then they'll probably just stay safe and sort of dormant almost within the brain case of this giraffe. And for insects that are able to find a home like that, then that's what they'll do. But many, like I explained to you earlier, will just sort of die, and their eggs will survive over the winter time, and then they'll hatch during the summer. And just a quick one on the front of the skull here. Now we know that giraffe skulls calcify. So there you can see a calcification bump. This whole bump here is from fighting. And in much the same way as rugby players and gridiron football players have thickening of the skull from continual bashing, so the giraffe's skull starts to calcify. And you saw on that giraffe that Brent was looking at, you could see that it had, the skin was broken, and it's this calcified lump that's growing through the skin there. And that doesn't form unless there's been repeated concussions to the head. Then the other thing, of course, is this thing called an ossicone. And an ossicone is a fancy way of saying horn, except that it isn't a horn. And there are actually 4 different kinds of sort of head protuberances, if you like. Don't you like that word, John? Protuberance? Yes. Try and say it.
Protuberance.
You see, he can't say. He said protuberance. I'll teach him when we're off air. So 4 kinds of different protuberances that come out of an animal's head. And they are all different families of animals. So the one family is the cervids, those are the deer, they have antlers. Then we have the Giraffidae, which have these ossicones. And then we of course have the vast family of bovids, which have horns, many of which I've showed you, which are bony like this, but they've got that keratin sheath on them. And then of course we have a family all on its own called the pronghorn antelope of North America. They only occur there, and their horns are slightly different, and they are bony, but they're a bit like these ossicones. The only 2 animals in the world that have ossicones are the giraffe and the okapi. And the okapi, of course, a close relative of the giraffe that lives in the basin of the Congo, so in the forests there. Now you can see here that it is growing continuously. It starts off very skinny, it starts off unfused with the skull, and it is a sort of cartilaginous join onto the top of the skull that gets thicker and thicker and thicker as the giraffe ages. And you can see, we can actually break off a piece here. You can see these little pieces breaking off. And that's where all the osteoblasts and osteocytes and the other bits and pieces of microbiology, I suppose, would be. Now we'll have a closer look. I'm just going to extend the size. Excuse me, Andre. Let's have a look here. Now what we'll do is just sort of put the microscope over the skull. There we go. Look at that. There we go, Hoppy. How's that? Look at that, everyone. Those are the different layers. It looks like marble, doesn't it? I think that's rather amazing. So those are the different layers that are getting put down all the time. The reason it looks so flaky like that is of course because it's being layered continuously. It is amazing. And you know what? Inside every one of these little crevices there's something potentially living. I think that's amazing. Now, we had a question also about the gecko that we found inside the buffalo skull yesterday. I haven't looked. I'm prepared to look. So let's just see if we can't find him. First thing I'm going to get, however, is my light, which seems to have been stolen from me. No, it hasn't. Here it is. I have my light, So let's get the light and let's get the buffalo skull, and I'm going to retrieve it very carefully because our gecko is living in the brain case with his 2 eggs. He's got 2 eggs inside the brain case of this buffalo. Now Hoppy, I think you're going to have to show us via the microscope. No, you're definitely going to have to show us via the microscope. So we put this into the skull, and then we shine the light, and okay, now I should be able to focus this now. There we go. So let's just look. There are the eggs. Focus. Sorry, Hoppy, I will focus it eventually. There we go. Focus on the eggs. Those are the 2 gecko eggs. Now let's find out if Mr. and Mrs. It must be Mrs. Gecko is out hunting, or if she's actually in here. So those haven't hatched yet. There's the remains of a daddy long-legged spider that probably spent, oh, that's amazing. Look at that. That probably spent much of the summer here. I think that's dead. It looks like it's just the exoskeleton. That's fantastic. Now just see if I can't find the gecko. Well, while I do that, everybody, you're going to get a bit seasick looking at that image. I'll see if I can find the gecko in here, the adult. While I'm doing that, Leo Smith is driving up a hill with that rather strange headdress that he has on the top of his bonce.